Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to our 10th episode of STACchats. I'm Jack Tortoroli, the Executive in Residence and Head of Institutional Advancement at the college. Today, I'm super excited to have a former colleague and friend of mine, David Sable, join us. So first of all, welcome, David. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Jack. Anytime I see you is just an occasion, so thank you.
Same here, my friend. So let me tell our audiences a little bit about you, David, because your career is just extraordinary. So David started as a senior advisor, now a senior advisor at WPP, where he's mentoring across the different consulting organizations within WPP. In his previous role, David was CEO of Y&R, Young and Rubicam. David propelled Y&R to a top 5 global creative firm recognized at Cannes, all the while evangelizing the spirit of competitive advantage, innovation, and collaboration, which is quite a lot of what I want to talk about today with you as well. David's involvement in the advertising industry, though, has spanned over 40 years, including startups before joining Y&R as a trainee in 1976. After an initial stint at Y&R, David relocated to Israel, where he co-founded an ad agency that was focused on the then nascent high-tech industry and was the foundation of the Startup Nation. When David returned to the US, he came back to the Y&R group, which is where I then got the pleasure of meeting and working with David. And there he helped pioneer Y&R's cross-agency team approach across the firm, and particularly with some of our largest clients, like at the time, United States Postal Service, and transformed the agency into an award-winning industry benchmark. In 1996, David became a founding partner in one of the first digitally focused omni-channel startups called Genesis Direct. In 2000, he took the experience to Wunderman, where he was mentored by the late Lester Wunderman, and ultimately served as Wunderman's vice chairman, helping them to transition into WPP after the acquisition by WPP, where it became a digital data powerhouse before returning to Y&R as global CEO. David's an active industry participant as a former chairman of the Advertising Council's board of directors, and for many years before was director at large at the 4As. He has served as the jury president for Cannes 3 times and was a member of the Titanium jury. He now serves as a keynote speaker at major global events, motivational speaker, and advises industry leaders worldwide. And oh, by the way, David has also been a prolific writer, where he's recently written a children's book called What Would You Wish For? David's a designated LinkedIn influencer, where he ranks among the most widely read business leaders in the world. He also served as an executive producer on MTV's highly acclaimed Rebel Music series. In 2013, Fast Company named David one of the 10 most generous marketing geniuses. That's a title I wish somebody would give me one day. He currently serves on the board of directors of both UNICEF USA and the International Special Olympics, as well as the UNCF. David's also a member of the public company side of American Eagle Outfitters board of directors. Wow, David, what a career. So let me start out at the beginning. What made you go into this industry? What attracted you to it?
So I think it was the creative side of it. I was always creative. That was what I did. I wasn't the best basketball player, although I liked to play basketball. I wasn't the best baseball player, although I liked to play baseball. So I was always the one who would be the producer or the director of the show. Occasionally I'd be the actor, but the truth is I enjoyed the producing, the directing, and figuring out even when I was younger, how does it look? How do you put it together? What's a script? How can I write my own script? How can I create puppets when I was even younger and create scripts around that? So I found that the creative side was really interesting to me. That's what I wanted to do. When I was in high school, in my last year, you know, in our school, we're very progressive kind of a high school. And they had pioneered this program where once you got into college, they wanted you to go work someplace as part of a work-study program for the last 2-3 months of the year of your, school career. And my dad had friends who had, at the time, which was this hot little agency in New York, very retail focused, but very hot, very interesting, very creative. I went there as an intern and never left the industry.
Mm.
So I started writing copy. I started selling copy. I was just a kid. And then I had an opportunity to go to Y&R. Interesting enough, is in the training program, which is a whole nother story. I took that and then just spent the rest of my life learning as much as I could. I've done everything from television production to actually pasting up ads in the old days when you actually had to take glue and
Yeah.
paste ads down, setting type. I worked at Burson Marsteller, as you know, that's where we worked together.
Yep.
And I learned at the feet of Harold Burson and Buck Buchwald what it was like to go into the C-suite and be able to be smart and be able to work through a crisis, be able to work through a merger and acquisition. So I learned that side of the business, the strategy side of the business. So I really have spent my professional career learning how to be useful to clients. I mean, that's all I could think about. It's like, how much more can I learn? What can I learn next? What can I do next that I haven't done that'll add some value to somebody someplace along the line?
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit like the folks at IDEO would say human-centered design thinking, but how do you look to solve a need, right, and be creative around that solution as opposed to just thinking here's the answer and selling an answer without understanding the problem you're trying to solve for.
Right, which I think is one of the problems today, right? So, what do big companies tend to sell resources?
Yeah.
And so the solution has to be in the resource. I think you probably remember because it was a big Burson thing back in the day, but if your only tool is a hammer, your only solution is a nail.
Yeah.
And so I like schlepping the entire toolbox because you never know. Maybe it's not a nail, maybe it's glue, maybe it's string,
Yeah.
maybe it's something else. So I just believe that you have to think bigger than whatever your limited resource is and be able to go to a client with a solution that maybe doesn't include you, maybe does, but maybe the way it includes you is you're the one smart enough to know that it doesn't really, but then the client counts on you anyways,
right,
to be
right,
there at their side.
right.
So it's a win-win.
Yeah, I remember when we were together, one of the innovations that I know you helped bring to life was this idea, and I still use the phrase best alone, better together. And I remember we were talking about, bringing the power of all of the Y&R group agencies to bear. Because as you know, if you go to a podiatrist, you're always going to come away with a foot problem. And what we were trying to say is, look, we're not going to presume the solution is an ad or the solution is a PR campaign. We'll let that kind of come to life through the different inputs. And I think that was one of the differentiators of the firm back then. And I know you were a big part of that.
It was. I had nothing to do with that line, but it was Ed Ney and that crew. But the truth is that I was the sort of pioneer at the helm of driving one of the first big clients that we actually managed in that way, where people came together, sat on a floor together, left their companies, but we looked at the companies as resources to use, but we looked at the people as resources to solve problems. And so that was a completely different way of looking at it. So the person who ran one piece of the business for us might have come from a public relations firm because we ascertained that particular division on the client side had more PR issues than anything else. But they occasionally could have something else. But the fact that the people who ran the businesses had open access to all these resources really changed the way we delivered. And I was really proud of the work that we did then.
Yeah. And David, do you think that that's more typical today in the ad agency business? Do you see it being more integrated than it was back, in the 90s, in the 80s when you started in the 70s?
Yeah, I mean, I'm proud of the way WPP goes to market. I think that we've done a really good job. I think Mark Reed, who's the CEO, has taken it to a new level. And again, I think that around client leaders who are chosen because they have a particular sense of that business or of the needs of the business and understand all the resources that we have and other resources, again, because sometimes the answer doesn't come from you. And so I think there's more. Again, I think that part of the issue is clients have changed.
Mm,
I think clients tend to look for bargains.
yeah.
And so when you look for bargains, you break up the solution as much as you can sometimes. And I think that's a mistake.
Mm,
And, I think it fragments you, it fragments your focus, it fragments your ability to actually deliver quicker.
yeah.
So I think it's a challenge to the left and to the right, but I think that the agency world for sure is doing it way better. And I'm proud that we at Y&R back in the day is created by Ed Ney. It was called The Whole Egg. I mean, he was prescient. This was in the 70s, long before
Yeah.
when I was still in high school, that he realized that clients in the future would need more. And he spearheaded the purchase of Wonderman, which at the time was direct marketing, but really was data marketing.
Yeah.
Long before anybody knew that term, Lester talked about it. Harold Burson was the primo public relations person of last century, without a doubt. And we bought that business. And so when you look at Sudler and Hennessy, because we knew that design would be important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. What, David, you've had such an illustrious career. What do you sit back and say, boy, this was really something to be proud of. This is something where, I felt that I put my best self forward. We got a great solution for a client. From a professional point of view, what would you say are some of the best or most satisfying outcomes that you've had in your career?
So, it's a hard question, particularly because we have so many clients. I don't want to insult anybody, but I'll give you a couple. One of them was Colgate. So Colgate is a long-term Y&R client, now a long-term WPP client. It is one of the most seamless accounts that I know, where so many of the agency resource and others come together and work to solve issues. But back in the 80s, we launched tartar control toothpaste for Colgate in 55 or 60 countries around the world. No one had ever done anything like that, not P&G, not Unilever. And Colgate, who was the tiny company by comparison to them,
Mm-hmm.
we led that pitch. I was traveling all around the world with, those days you didn't carry a laptop that had all the creative in it. You carried a big bag with 3/4-inch pneumatic tapes that had all the creative in it.
Yeah.
And we managed to drive a strategy that was appropriate for every country, but also had an umbrella set of assets so that you didn't have to recreate the wheel in every country.
Sure.
We managed to launch it in language culturally appropriate in every country. We had a professional side for dentists. We had a public relations side. And we did this globally. No one had ever done that before. And you have to remember, this is before there was email. This is before there were cell phones. This is before there were laptops. And, I remember I would go to the Far East for 2 weeks at a shot. It wasn't like, these days you go overnight and you come back.
Yep.
I would literally go for 2 weeks at a shot. And occasionally I'd have to call from a cell phone, from a payphone. Remember, you put in money with an AT&T long distance credit card it was crazy. And I was in Indonesia in a coup. I was in the Philippines during a coup.
Wow. Yeah.
During typhoons, and you had no way to communicate. But it was amazing. It was the first time it had ever been done, and we did it. We put it together with Y&R, Burson Marsteller, Sudler and Hennessy doing the professional work, and so I was incredibly proud of that. That really set me on my way for the rest of my life, because I realized how powerful that was.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the second and third are actually linked. One through Burson Marsteller, actually Conan Wolf. Burson Marsteller is now called Burson Marsteller Conan Wolf. Back then, there were two separate companies. I managed a piece of Conan Wolf for a couple of years. Conan Wolf, so I was living in Atlanta. I was the assistant general manager, whatever the company. So I was number 2 in the office. Worked for some wonderful people, Jim Overstreet, Bob Cohen. And I pitched a piece of business called the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority.
Yeah, sure.
The big pitch. Now, we all know the TVA. We all knew the TVA from your civics class, your American history class. Like, who knew that it still existed?
Right.
Yeah. Who knew? So we pitched it. We were the underdogs. We came from, because we were New York based, and even though we had Atlanta was really our big was really the core, but everybody thought because of person it was New York based. I was from New York, and we were pitching against Southern agencies, and we were pitching against some pretty heavy people. Jurdy, not Powell, Jurdy, if he has his name, he worked for Carter. We were pitching against some of the toughest people. And the chairman of TVA at the time was Marvin Runyon, the late Marvin Runyon. It was one of the most incredible human beings I ever worked for in my life. He was my client for many years after this. And we went down to pitch it. He was a tough man. And you can read about him in the book, The Reckoning by David Halberstam about Ford.
Sure.
So he and Lee Iacocca were the two rising stars.
That's right.
Marvin represented manufacturing and engineering, Iacocca marketing, and marketing won. And Marvin always said the sadness of Iacocca winning is that was what preceded the decline of Ford in those days. Now they've come back, thank God. Marvin always said he was a marketing guy who knew nothing about engineering or manufacturing. He said, I was the engineering manufacturing guy who was incredibly creative. So we would have been bigger earlier.
Right.
But he became chairman of TVA, and one of the things he wanted to do was going to be a big riff, and they were going to lose people. They'd never done that before. They were going to change the entire way they looked at their power infrastructure, at the way they generated power, closed down a bunch of reactors that had been built in really terrible ways, change the logo, change all the language around to become a professional organization. And he hired us. And I never thought he would. And I have to tell you, the first time I went down, I've told this story often, I literally, I came in with, my New York Italian, probably Armani-ish suit. All these guys are very, so I felt like a pimp in a room of preachers. It was really, you can't even imagine. But we won. We won. And Marvin liked me because I told him the truth. I looked him in the eye, and he was a pretty scary guy in those days. And it was amazing what we did, because it's not that doing a riff is not a good thing. That's sad, and I feel bad. So I'm not proud that we're part of the riff. But what I am proud of is that we put together one of the very first computerized programs to help people find jobs.
Wow.
So you have to remember, this is now in the 80s, the mid 80s, and we literally were able to create a database of names and what people did, send that all around the country, and have people look and say, okay, like in Maine, we need 5 engineers who know how to do X. Right? And so we helped people get jobs. We put together an incredible public relations program where we went to all of the churches in the Valley, and it's a 7-state region. We went to every single church leader with a program. And we said to them, look, there are going to be people in your parish who are out of work. And they've never been out of work before. And it's going to be tough for them. And this is what they get. But here's a number you can call for help. And here's how you help them. And here's the job line. And here's this and that. Wow. So he got a lot of credit for that. So that was amazing. And then he went to become Postmaster General. And he took me with him, so to speak, and then it became our biggest account at the time in all of Y&R, Burson Marsteller. And we helped him do the same thing. We helped him literally change the face of the Postal Service. He got rid of all of the titles that were all very Army-ish and bureaucratic, and replaced it with vice presidents and functional titles about what they did. We redesigned the logo. The logo of the eagle that is today is the logo that we designed and that we implemented for him. We talked about the information highway, which was the internet. Nobody knew about the internet, but we wrote tons about it. So those are kinds of things that we did. We had huge impact. And then not to mention all of the nonprofit work we've done, whether it was for UNCF or UNICEF, or whoever. I just think these are Special Olympics, all of whom I happen to be involved with now, but all of whom I got to know because we were doing all this nonprofit work.
Yeah, well, and that speaks to a lot of the values for you as a person as well, you know, in terms of what you're involved in and how, what you took away from that. You know, going back to the Colgate thing, you know, I think now people just take it as it was always like that, where you create centrally and then you adapt locally. But back then, you know, it was every country was on their own, you know, do your own thing. So it's amazing now when you look back at what was, you know, and you look today, people coming into the industry think this is how it's always been done. And it's
Right. So
only
I'll
been
tell
the
you a funny
last.
story. I remember part of this trip. I remember when we were selling in the idea, because we had to sell it in still. We couldn't demand. Colgate could sort of on their side, but even they couldn't. So
Yeah.
I had to go from country to country and sit in meetings with the Colgate people and our people and sell them that this was the right thing to do. So I remember being in France. I came in early in the morning, took a shower, went to the office, and I had to tell them what we're going to do. And I show them the work. And so, of course, the first thing that comes back is great work, but it'll never work in France.
Right.
The idea will never work in France. The stuff will never work. Nothing like that will ever work in France. And I'm trying to formulate my response. And as I look around the room, and I'd been to France on business before many times, so I'd never been this deep in it. As I look around the room, I'm seeing like all these guys, they're all wearing Levi's jeans. I swear to you, all wearing Levi's jeans. They all have Ray-Ban sunglasses on or on the desk or whatever. They're all smoking Marlboro, and everybody had a Parker pen.
Right.
And it was such a revelation to me about the power of brands and how the issue is not that those were American brands, which they were, and we had made them cool in America, but that these people had assimilated that into their own culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it became coolly French to look that way and to wear that stuff. And they would probably argue with you and tell you, no, actually, they're all French products.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
But that gave me the inspiration of how to sell this in the right way. So, but yeah, in those days, it wasn't done.
For sure. David, a lot's going on now in the industry, and media obviously has changed with the advent of all the social platforms, instant PR, anybody's a PR person at the moment. What do you think that, as you look forward now in sort of where the industry that you spent 40 years in, where does it go next? And do you see a point where agencies need to adapt to something different to avoid being disintermediated potentially between the ability for anyone to go direct to a consumer without an agency involved?
So it's a good question, and it's one that I think consumes many. Here's my bet. See, my bet is 1,000 years from now, assuming that human beings are still around and that, we haven't completely evolved into something else and we're still interested in buying and wearing and being different and whatever, there will be agencies. Or what not like they look like today, but again, the agency today doesn't look like the agency of 100 years ago either.
Right.
Because what's true is, you have to understand the consumer and you have to deliver a story that connects, because the business is all about it. I don't care. It so amazes me. So, oh my God, the business has changed. Streaming has changed everything. No, it hasn't. All it's changed is the way you see it, but you still want the best content.
That's right.
Like, what's changed? In fact, I'll tell you what's changed is that before you couldn't get great directors to work on anything that wasn't big theater.
Right.
But today they'll work on it because they understand that it's just, that's the way we distribute. And so what's the point? Might as well be in it. But we spend more today on production, not less. And by the way, even with all the special effects that we do in some movies or all, as we know, all special effects, there is more actually happening in situ than ever before. People are going on location more than ever before.
Yeah.
And the cost of production has soared. And so that says to me, like, people want great stories. They're never going to give up great stories. So, I mean, you can create great stories any place, and maybe one day they're right. A computer will be the next Shakespeare. I have more faith in the limitations of stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
I'm meaning that it's not that I'm putting it down, but if you don't have a heart and a soul, you can't write Shakespeare.
That's right.
Yeah, sure, maybe you can write a news story and kind of make it interesting, not even interesting, but give the facts
Yeah,
and
right.
make it a little interesting. But now put it up against somebody who actually has a heart and soul
Yeah,
and
yeah,
can write, and
yeah.
it's different.
Well, and to your point, I think two things. One is it comes back to the power of the brand and how you express the brand in a relevant way to the consumer you're trying to reach. And you're always going to need, and so the power of the brands are ever more important with all the clutter and sort of all of the explosion of craft, whether it's in the spirits industry or pick an industry, but there's always innovation, and how do you get the brand to kind of stay where it belongs? And then it's
Right,
just,
that's true. But I would go, like even a step further. I would say, so look at Harry Potter. Harry Potter was written by a woman living in her car
yeah.
who was trying to feed her kids and had this vision.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's no AI in the world that's going to understand that's
Mm-hmm.
going to do it. Yes, I could program in wizards, come up with stuff, and maybe it'd be something, but it's just not gonna have that same depth.
Yeah, yeah. I tend to agree with you. And and there's a difference between how you consume content and how it's distributed than how it's made. And it's still all about the power of the content, even if you're making it now for Netflix rather than for a release date, in a cinema. So,
Yeah.
so that's certainly true. Talking about stories, David, how did you then transition into an author, and why, children's books and the book that you wrote? What was the inspiration there?
So a few years ago, as you know, I like to write.
Mm-hmm.
I have a pretty big audience on LinkedIn. I'm very proud of, and that they've honored me with the status that they have. But I was approached by one of the big talent agencies, and they said, "Oh, we'd like to represent you. We think you should write a business book."
Mm.
And so I started to think about it, and we had a few meetings, and I started writing the book, and I wrote a chapter, and then I wrote the table of contents. And as I'm writing, I'm thinking, like, who the hell wants to read this?
Yeah.
And I wasn't even interested to write it, never mind, let alone reading it. And I started to think, like, is there any business book I really like? And maybe there's one or two.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, I just felt the world didn't need another business book. So I stopped. But I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories. I've always loved reading children's books. Always. And I read them to my children. I read them to my children, not to my grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this idea in me that began because as I looked out about 2 years ago to the future, I said, we're going to end up, I was already concerned because of what social media was creating or causing, is more to the point. I felt that the children were losing the ability to really imagine, to really understand that their wishes need to be worked on. I think they're wishing for the wrong stuff.
Mm.
I started to think about how do we teach kids that they can actually change the world. And then I looked out and I said, it's going to be a miserable 2 years. Like, we're going to come into a period of time, it's going to be the worst time in the history of America.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Like, I saw everything that's happening now, I saw 2 years ago. It
Mm.
just was so clear to me that this is going to happen.
Mm.
So I had this idea about wishes, and it started, I was just started to think, like, if a genie gave you 3 wishes, like, what would you wish for?
Yeah.
And I started talking to my grandchildren about it. And it couldn't be that you wished for like 3 more wishes at the end. Like, that was
Right.
wishes. Like, we all know that trick, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, and that evolved into what would you wish for? What would you do if all of the wishes you wished for could really come true?
Mm.
And so the idea is, what would you do?
Mm.
Like, what would you do? What would you do with your wish? How would you make it work?
Mm.
Did you understand that your wish, if you wish for the wrong thing, which might be the right thing for you, I'm not putting it down, but if you wish for all the ice cream in the world, by definition, your friends are not going to have any ice cream.
Right. Right.
And so you need to understand that. You need to understand that. You need to understand, if you ask for the coolest, most expensive, craziest sneakers, your friends don't have those.
Right.
So what good does it do you if that's all you wish for?
Mm.
So I was able to work with an incredible illustrator, Emma Yarlett, who's English, did a brilliant job, and the book is pretty successful. So you can find on Amazon, What Would You Wish For?
Mm-hmm.
By David Sable. It's available on Amazon. So
It's great. No, I've got it for my
kids, please,
I've given
grandkids.
it to my kids who are giving it to my grandchildren. So I can vouch for the quality of the storytelling and the book. So
Thank you.
congratulations.
Anybody who does buy it and likes it, post me a review on Amazon.
I will. I'll do that.
Authors need it. Authors need it. It's very important.
Terrific. David, you know, we talk a little bit, you talked about seeing 2 years ago what we're seeing now in this country. Obviously, social justice, social equity is huge. And I'm wondering, you know, we talk a lot about minority implications and inner city families and children. And, you know, I had on a few weeks ago a professor from Villanova that talked about the intersection of racism and politics. I had on a professor from Georgetown that wrote a book called The Franchise, which was all about the impact on inner city Black people of the McDonald's, right? They're the only ones left in the inner city, and this is what people are eating, which is causing some of their health issues. And so how do you deal with that? But I wonder for you, you know, having spent time in Israel, being Jewish, and I know you have a high school story that I want our audiences to hear as well. But how do you approach that with your, you know, religious beliefs and you know your time in Israel and your heritage? How do you think, you know, are we dealing enough with that? Are we being narrow, or should we be wider in how we think about social equity?
So mine pretty simple. You know, my father was a rabbi, so I grew up as a child of a member of the clergy, and which is a whole nother story in and of itself. But in my telling, I go right back to the Bible, right? So God created man, humankind in his image, and that's it. Doesn't say, and by the way, there's two stories of creation. So there's the first story and the second story. So first God creates man and woman, but it's not clear. And so some people say it was androgynous or whatever. It doesn't make a difference. But it never says God created a Jew, a Christian, or a Muslim. Never says God created a white guy, a black. It just doesn't exist, right? So we're all created in the image of God. So what does that mean? That means that we're all the same.
Yeah.
And so I've approached my life that way always. I've never understood. It's literally, I have no, like I'm missing the gene that says, okay, like I get why this race, I don't get it. I don't get why people kill each other. I don't get why religion causes strife. Religion should cause nothing but love. And so I come out of it and say, that's the answer, right? There's only one answer. You don't even have to believe in the Bible. Believe in the Big Bang Theory. Believe that we came from the primal ooze, but we all came from the same primal ooze.
Right.
Let's be really clear.
Yeah.
So when I think about that, it changes the way I look at. It changes the way I look at everything.
That's great. It's a great insight. Great answer. One of the things we talked about, David, was you know, the new normal. Is there a new normal? Well, is there no normal? And I know you have some thoughts on that as well. So what is it? What does that mean for you as you think about it?
Well, there is no new normal. I think normal. There once was a normal, and the reason there was a normal is change happened always. Evolution happens always, but it was gradual enough that you didn't feel the jolt of it. So Henry Ford starts producing cars, but you still have cars and horses on the street at the same time. By the time it flips, it's okay. We're all there. And so that becomes normal to all of us. I think in today's world, to suggest that there's a new normal suggests this stasis. And right now, there is no stasis. There's no center to our world. This COVID thing changes every day. The rules change every day. The input changes. How could you say that there's a new normal? There is no new normal. We might start school and can't. Look how many colleges started and now closed.
Yeah.
Look how many offices we're going to open in October, now opening in January, some not until next July.
Yep.
So I think that it's a disservice to talk about new normal. I mean, I've said,
Mm.
gone so far as to say that when the consultants come into you and start talking to you about the new normal, throw them the hell out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because crap, you'll fail. You will fail if you look for the new normal.
Yeah.
What you have to understand is that this is truly, we talk about, we pontificate for the past 10 years about being in the dynamic, agile time, everything's changing. But the truth is we really didn't. Now it's actually true.
Yeah.
This is the time that we all pontificated about for so long.
Yeah.
So now you have to be agile. There is no center. There's no anchor.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that is, I get nuts when people say, well, we're all in the same boat. We're all in this together. No, we're not.
No.
And you might have seen there was somebody took down, it was great, most of the advertising that happened during that first piece of the pandemic, during the dark ages of the pandemic. And they basically spliced together from 20 different ads from 20 different companies. It was all the same message. We're all in this together, the same footage, the same music, the same message, the same whatever. See, here's the deal. We're all in the same storm. And COVID is a storm. The storm of COVID affects all of us.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not in the same boat.
Yeah.
And we're not in it together. We're all in different boats in the same storm.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is the critical thing that has to be understood.
Yeah.
Because some of us are in big luxury boats, some of us are in little leaky rowboats or in tubes maybe.
Yeah.
Other people are in, cigarette boats. Everybody is in a different boat.
Yeah.
So the best that we can do, and this is where we have zero leadership, we sort of need an admiral who's strong enough and whose leadership is good enough to steer us all to safe harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And then we need the people in the big luxury liners to understand that coming behind in our wake are people in leaky boats, and so you got to kind of stop and pick them up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so stop posting the pictures of yourself in the Hamptons and complaining about how tough it is.
Right.
Or in your private plane, how tough it is. Like, come on, guys, be real.
That's right.
Let's figure it out. So I think that's part of this. There's no new normal. We're not in the same, we're just not all doing the same thing here. We're not in the same boat, not even close.
Yep. No, I completely agree. And in fact, being at the college now, we're going through the opening and we're seeing, firsthand the differences, the economic differences, the impacts, differences of the impact on different families. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we are in a storm, but we're not in the same boat. And I actually worry about the younger kids, the students in grammar school and some of them in the inner city where they don't have access to remote learning and the parents have to, we're at a risk here of having a whole cadre of young people left behind in many respects. And it's scary. It's scary. Speaking of young people and as we think about our students and, we're going to graduate in the next year, I want to get into this business, David, that you so well mastered for 40 plus years. What advice would you have for students thinking about getting into marketing, getting into creative, getting into the media space? If you had a word of wisdom or two for them, what would that be?
I wish I did. So I'll give you a couple of thoughts. I don't know if they're words of wisdom. Always go people first. So even if you're the data person, you're the analyst, understand that algorithms are great, but you need human thinking and human understanding and human intel to make it all work. So be the person who really deeply understands humanity and deeply knows that all the algorithms, all the digital, all of that stuff are enablers.
Right.
They enable you to know more. They enable you to work more efficiently. They enable you to do a lot more, to target better. But it's your understanding of audiences and people. So that's one. The second thing is, I would say, learn from the past. Don't think that you've just discovered everything that existed, because you haven't. Learn from the past. Go back and look and see what people have done before.
Yeah.
If you want to really understand Amazon, go back and study the Sears Wish Book of the 1800s.
Right.
Read the mission statement of both. It'll blow your mind. It's like almost word for word the same. Understand that the early days of radio were not unlike the early days of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does that mean? And then how do you watch how that progressed? So what can you learn from that, and how can you make that work?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think this is the thing that from a creative point of view and just a connectivity point of view, that I say to everybody, think about this, right? So here we are talking about how we can connect more because we can retarget and I can find you and yada, yada, yada. I say, go back and ask yourself, why is it that thousands of years after it was written or revealed or whatever your religious beliefs happen to be, why is the Bible and the Quran still read with passion? And why do we iterate off it? Why do we still tell those stories? And why do we create stories from those stories? Why is the Iliad and the Odyssey still read and still iterated off? So the Coen brothers do their version of it even.
Right.
Right. Why is it that Harry Potter and Shakespeare are popular and people line up to see it? Why? Because there's something in those stories that connect elementally with our human DNA.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if you can understand that, if you can begin to understand it, I mean, I don't understand it, but I study it. I try to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
If you dismiss it and think it's only algorithm, you will fail.
Yeah. Which is an interesting perspective as you think about curriculums today, particularly in higher education, right? And do they give you the breadth of this humanity aspect, the historical aspect, and sort of the skills for tomorrow, which are going to be much more human-centered than they were in the past because of the enablers that are now and will come into the marketplace. So, I think one of the things we've been talking a lot here over the last few months is, and we're doing some work around it, but what are the skills that are going to be needed in the next 5 years or in the next 10 years? And how do we make sure that our students graduate with the ability to get a job and a career with those needs, as opposed to maybe the needs from today even, or certainly 5 or 10 years ago. So
I agree. So I would argue that you look at every single element and say, what's the people first approach?
Yep.
Like what is it about people? I mean, when you think about it, right? What are the biggest growing job areas now? The service jobs, taking care of people.
That's right.
Working in the warehouse. It's amazing actually when you think about it. That's and right. So what are we doing? What are we doing to upgrade even those people who do that? Mm-hmm. So that they're proud of what they do, so that they feel, my late grandfather was a Russian Jew, Russian immigrant, came from Russia, escaped the pogroms, came here in the early 1900s, joined the U.S. Army, fought in World War I because he got immediate citizenship, lived in Kingston, New York, a little town, now very famous and very cool, but days not so, it was in Depression time. And he always said, it doesn't make a difference what you do. And he was a poor man. He lived poor, died poor. Poor not in the sense of poverty, but not with a lot of money. And he always said, if you're the wind, he was a tailor, by the way. He said, if you wash windows, if you're the tailor, if you're the gardener, just do the best job you can.
That's right.
Be proud of who you are. Be proud of your work.
That's exactly right.
There's no stigma in working. There's no stigma in working hard. And I think that's something we need to instill again. In our culture.
Yeah. No, for sure. I take my own example with my parents immigrating from France, in the 50s. And I said this story before, but, my mom was a maid. My father started as a dishwasher and became a maitre d'. And it's all about every day bringing the best you and showing up, doing the best you can. Be proud of it. Everybody has a role to play.
My grandfather, I was just say, I'll just end with this. My grandfather never heard the word entitlement. Like he never heard the word entitlement. I'm sure he wouldn't have known what it meant, but he always said the world owes you nothing.
That's right.
Never make that mistake.
That's right.
You got to work hard.
That's right. David, thank you so much. You've been a delight, insightful as always, and I miss seeing you, but we'll get together soon, and hopefully hopefully get you down here to campus one day and see our beautiful place and talk some more.
I look forward. I have a particular affinity for St. Thomas, so.
I know. You should, by the way, tell us that story before you go.
Oh, all right. So first of all, I will tell you that I always had an affinity to Aquinas because I'm sure not everybody who's going to hear this knows that, but if you study his writings, you will notice that he talks occasionally about the Egyptian, who's somebody that he quotes. The Egyptian was in fact the Rambam, or Maimonides, who was the leading Jewish philosopher at the time. But because he was a Jew, he couldn't quote him.
Interesting.
Because the church wouldn't have been happy, so he called him the Egyptian. But they had very similar approaches to thinking, so he quoted him because it was his religious philosophy. When you took out the specifics of the religion, was very close to his.
Yeah.
So fast forward now, 1,000 years, however many years it was, and I'm it's summer school time or summertime. I couldn't go to camp because I had an accident. And my parents shipped me off to San Francisco to my grandparents. And my grandfather wanted me to have a great experience. And I was taking Latin in school. I went to a Jewish religious school. Interesting enough, I decided to take Latin, not French. It was interesting. And they got me a Latin teacher. There were 5 of us. And I wasn't all that good at it, languages. So I said, all right, I'll go to summer school. Right across the street from my grandparents in San Francisco was the #1 Catholic high school in all of San Francisco, which of course was St. Thomas Aquinas, right? What else would it be?
Yeah.
So he registers me for summer school to learn Latin. Now I have to tell you, I come into that class. There's never been a Jewish kid who walked through the door, and here I am, spending the whole summer learning Latin. And by the way, this is typical Jesuit. So imagine you start at 8 o'clock in the morning, one class, like forget it. It wasn't like I was taking a whole curriculum.
Right.
8 o'clock in the morning, 8 to 10:30. And then at 10:30, you had a break of 15 minutes. And we went 11:30 to 1. And what we did was Latin.
Wow.
Can you imagine?
Wow.
So I come into class the very first day. I'll never forget this. And it was Father Morehouse, who was the teacher. He was an incredible man. And he put me in the front seat, which I hated. I always sat in the back. He put me in the front seat. And he starts lecturing, and we start studying whatever it was we're studying. And then he gave us our homework. So what was our homework? Our homework was the lecture that day was how Latin had formed the basis of so many of the Romance languages. Like more than you knew. So he said, okay, here's what you're going to do. He said, you all, by tomorrow, will learn by heart the Lord's Prayer in French, Spanish, Italian, Gaelic. Mr. Sable, I'm assuming that you don't know it in Latin, so you will learn it in Latin. And by the way, Mr. Sable, you will also learn it for us in Hebrew.
Wow.
That was my first day of class.
Wow.
And it was such rigor and such an incredible summer. The end of the story is, by the way, that the kids were pretty rowdy. And, again, I'm the Jewish kid, and these guys have been together forever. Nobody talked to me the whole week.
Oh.
It was all, I thought, oh my God, I was depressed. I didn't know what to do. I would love to play basketball, but then nobody invited me to play in the break. Nobody talked. Nobody said hello to me. I sat in the front seat. And I noticed that after the break, these guys, they'd put tacks on each other's seats, like all these different things. And it was all fun. Nobody included me in anything. So it's the first Friday of the first week. And that's the end of the break. I sit down on my seat. There must have been 100 tacks on my seat. I literally, I'll never forget, I can still see it in my mind. I catapulted over the top of the desk, fell on the floor. My papers are all over, and I'm sitting right in front of him. His back was turned, and he turns around, and he says, "Mr. Sable, is there an issue?" And I said, "No, Father, I'm fine. I just slipped." And I look back, and the leader of the group goes like this to me, and I had the best summer of my life.
Oh, wow. Great story. Great story.
That was the first Jewish kid in St. Thomas Aquinas in San Francisco.
Well, that's great. Well, David, again, the book is called What Would You Wish For? And so hopefully our readers...
Available on Amazon.
Now on Amazon, so go out and get it. It's a great read. David, thank you so much for your time, and talk to you again soon. God
Bless you. It's always good to see you. Be well. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you, David.